What's that I hear you say? A car crash in 1903? A beautiful maiden selling her soul to the devil? David Platt scoring the winning goal against Belgium in 1990? Italy's finest opera composer? We can only be in one place. We're in Lucca. Hello you lovely people, and welcome to Lucca in Tuscany, Italy. Now, behind us is the Cathedral of St. Martin with its tower and its €10 entry charge. Now, some marvellous things have happened in this town, and indeed some not so marvellous things. Those city walls weren't built 500 years ago because the armies of Florence were all lovely and cuddly. It's the birthplace of Puccini. Probably even popped into that cathedral behind us there. Here we are, outside the Puccini Museum in Lucca. Now Lucca's famous for many things. It's famous for playing for Real Madrid, but that was Luka Modric. Suzanne Vega made Lucca famous.
My name is Lucca.
He lives on the second floor.
I live on the second floor.
But this city of Lucca, beautiful town in Tuscany, is most famous for being the birthplace, and this particular house is the birthplace of Lucca's most famous son, Giacomo Puccini, Italy's finest composer. Don't listen to those people who talk about Aida and Verdi. He did not compose Nessun Dorma. Now, Puccini is famous for operas, but he's also famous for football, because when I was a young man in 1990, I think I was 17, nearly 18, it was a fantastic football World Cup. And England nearly won it. And the BBC used to have the introduction with Nessun Dorma, sung by Luciano Pavarotti. And Nessun Dorma was the finale of Puccini's unfinished work, Turandot. And here is where Puccini began his life. One of the things that made me most fascinated with Puccini was not the music, and let's face it, there's many better people than me to talk about the music. It's not the opera. I really know very little about opera. It was his life. Now, like most Italian men, he liked a lady, and one of the ladies he liked was one of his students, Elvira. Now, Elvira was one of his piano students. She was a married lady, and Elvira's husband was a bit of a philanderer, a bit of a ladies' man. He used to gallivant around town, fraternising with the ladies. And Elvira felt all rejected and fell into the arms of Giacomo Puccini. And who wouldn't, let's face it. And they made beautiful music together. And who wouldn't, let's face it. Now, Puccini composed some of the most famous operas. La Bohème, Tosca, Madame Butterfly. And he also composed Turandot. I'm not going to bore you with my thoughts about opera. I know nothing. I'm not going to bore you with my thoughts about music. I can barely hold a note. What I am going to tell you a little bit about is the love life of Giacomo Puccini. In 1884, Puccini began an affair with one of his students. Her name was Elvira, and Elvira already had a daughter called Fosca. But that wasn't going to stop our hero Puccini. A mother she might be, a wife she might be, but Elvira's husband, Narciso, was a bit of a philanderer, a womanizer, constantly about town with other ladies. And Elvira had enough, and into the arms of Puccini she fell. Now, at some point, Elvira falls pregnant herself. Now, I never really understand how you can fall pregnant. It needs a bit more than falling to become pregnant, but yeah, let's use a euphemism. She fell pregnant. Now, this is 1886. And Elvira had to flee Lucca because she had begun to show. Now, I think actually what she'd begun to do was cover up, but eventually the covering up wasn't going to work anymore. So she fled Lucca. Elvira had their son out of wedlock, the bastardo Antonio, and came back only when Antonio was born. And the torrid affair with Puccini continued. Now, this didn't stop Narciso putting it about all over town. And eventually In 1903, Narciso meets his death, bludgeoned and killed by the husband of a woman he was gallivanting with. Now, the day before, Puccini had had a car accident with Elvira in the car, heading off to their house. They were heading out of Lucca, and suddenly their 1903 car careered off the side of the road and flipped, and Puccini was trapped underneath. He was freed by a doctor. Who would have thought? That's a bad day. The next day, your lover's husband dies. Doesn't get much better than that. Now, Puccini had to rest and get better, and people were upset because his opera was being a bit delayed. Now, if you had a car on top of you, I think you're probably going to have to take a couple of months off just to get yourself back in shape. But it was Puccini, and everyone was waiting for this opera to come out. So finally, Elvira and Puccini are free to marry, and you think, they're going to live happily ever after. Oh no, because very much like Narciso, I mean, she seems to have a type, and Elvira has picked him. Our dear friend Puccini's putting it about all over town as well, and other towns, because after all, he's a world-famous composer, and he gets to visit all sorts of other towns. So yeah, he's off to Budapest, and in 1906, barely a couple of years after they've tied the knot, Puccini's having an affair with one of his best friend's sisters. Poor old Elvira on the receiving end again. And it wasn't just Blanca Lendvai from Budapest that Puccini was having an affair with. There were many, many others. Poor old Elvira. Such a miserable soul. Then in 1909, Elvira then accuses Dora Manfredi of having an affair with her husband. And it all goes crazy. And Dora Manfredi eventually commits suicide. The shame of it all. And then they inspect to see if Manfredi was actually having an affair with Puccini, and they find out that actually Dora Manfredi died a virgin. So I don't even know what that's about. A woman's died for no reason whatsoever. The wife of Puccini accuses a virgin of having an affair with her husband. Half the town's had an affair with her husband, but she's killed herself, and it was all for nothing. Elvira was prosecuted for slander and only got out of a jail sentence because the Puccini family paid the Manfredi family money. And then in 2007, as recently as that, documents were found to say Puccini wasn't having an affair with Dora. He was actually having an affair with her cousin. So Dora's dead for no reason, should have been the cousin. There was a payment made for slander, which, to be fair, they could have probably afforded. And the weird thing about it was that the cousin, Giulia Manfredi, had a son called Antonio. Does this mean that Puccini has 2 children called Antonio? Who knows? He could even have more. But that is not the worst thing that has happened here in Lucca. And we're going to go over to the Botanical Gardens now and find out something a little bit more scary. So we're here in the Botanical Gardens of Lucca. Now obviously botanical gardens are beautiful things very often. Not the one in Phong Nha in Vietnam, where I went expecting to see flowers, expecting to see tropical plants. And what I got was a 2-hour hike on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But this is a beautiful garden. It's got trees, and I'm sure in springtime there'll be flowers. Now, it hides a secret. It hides the story of Lucida. Back in 1606, a beautiful maiden came into the world, born into a rich Lucca family, the Saminiati. Lucida grew up to be the most beautiful woman in town, coveted by all the men. Now first, she married for love, Vincenzo Diversi. Now Vinny ended up carking it. So she ended up marrying a very rich man, husband number 2. His name was Gaspare di Niccolao Mansi. And he had a big, big palace, Palazzo Mansi. Now, the vain, although beautiful, Lucida quite liked having the robes, the trinkets, the garments, and the big, big palace. And she wandered around town with her jewellery until one fateful day, poor old Gaspare carks it himself. 2 dead husbands. Now, rumours are that Lucida may well have been responsible for Gaspare's death. What would she stand to benefit? Oh, well, that's right, yes, the Palazzo Mansi and all his worldly goods. All the cathedral bells toll, just as they've always done in this town. Now, dear old Lucida, she loved her lifestyle and went round town finding young men who also adored her beauty. She was coveted by them all. And I do suspect at some point Lucida may have worked her way through a certain amount of young Lucan gentlemen until one day in her bedchamber she's staring at one of the millions of mirrors that adore her wall and her ceiling, and rumours are that she even had one in her prayer book, because obviously when you're praying you need to check out how hot you look. And she finds a wrinkle. Oh dear. Now this is a disaster for a woman who bases her entire reputation on being hot, fit and being able to pull young Italian men. Suddenly a handsome man appears in front of her. This is the legend, of course. I don't know how a handsome man does appear in front of someone when they're in the bedchamber without risking a break-in and entering charge, but a handsome man appears in front of her and he says, I see you're a bit troubled because you're losing your looks. I can fix that for you, but we're going to do a deal, because I am the devil. And that's right, the devil appeared before Lucida, and he doesn't do deals for no one, for nothing. And the devil appears and he says, I'll keep your looks exactly as they are. You will have 30 years of unblemished beauty. And the only thing I ask from you is in 30 years' time, I'm going to reappear. And I'm going to take your soul. And I'm going to take your soul down to hell. So, Lucida, because she's all about the looks, can you imagine what she'd be like now with Instagram and filters? How many times she'd be taking photographs of herself as she wanders past all these mirrors on shop windows. No, they don't have mirrors in shop windows. She had hundreds in her ceiling and on her walls and all around Palazzo Mansi. So, yeah, Lucida bites the devil's hand off, does a pact with the devil. That doesn't always end well. And as you can imagine, 30 years, she's wandering around town. Young men are invited back to her bedchamber, probably not to look at the mirrors. And she has an enormous amount of local success until 30 years has passed and the devil reappears. Now, there are two different versions of this legend. One version says, in the Palazzo Mansi, a hole, an abyss appears in her bedchamber floor, and suddenly the devil appears and drags her down to hell, which is pretty dramatic. Now, that hole could not be covered up for years and years and years and years and years until finally they got it covered, and now it can't be uncovered, and that is the path to hell. Now, that's not my favourite version. My favourite version involves where we are today in the Botanical Gardens. The Botanical Gardens of Lucca, surrounded by the city walls just here, and the devil appears on his carriage of fire and drags the beautiful, the adored Lucida all around the city walls before arriving here at this lake. And then he drags her down through a hole in the middle of the lake to hell. Now, that's probably not what happened.
Non si possono fare riprese all'orto se non sono autorizzate dal comune.
Do you speak
Solo
English?
per niente.
Okay. There you go, local lady. I'll translate that when I get home. Now, that's my favourite version of the story. And the rumours are that if you go in to the lake, you can see the reflection of Lucida in the water. Now, that probably isn't what happened. Probably what happened is, in 1649, Lucida died of the plague. But that's nowhere near as exciting. And just because they say she was buried over there in a Capuchin monastery, nah, she's in there, in that lake. If I went out into it, which is a bit cold and I don't want to do it, and it's got lots of leaves and strange roots on that tree there, could be her fingers reaching up. No, I'm not going to exaggerate. We don't need to exaggerate and already exaggerate. Sorry. But yeah, this is it. The mystery of Lucida Mansi. What happened to her? Vanity doesn't get you anywhere. You're listening to that, kids. Get off Instagram, stop TikToking. Have a wander around a park. There you go, a little bit of heaven, a lot of adultery, and a little bit of hell, courtesy of the devil. This has been Heaven and Hell Travels in Lucca. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, you might well like this one too. So click on it, see if you do. Thanks again.